Hi, everyone. Okay, so today is just a continuance of what we were talking about previously. Um, Before we get started, I probably wouldn't have gone this much in depth into a society issue that doesn't affect Manitoba, except for the fact that what quite often the things that we see or I see in Kenora often I see also occurring in Winnipeg or in Manitoba. And so I think it is kind of important that things are being addressed. And in the media, like with the news reports and everything else, I don't hear them asking the questions that should be asked. Like, was w- um was the mandate issued after the shooting or before the shooting? Because that's huge, right? Did they get permission to invoke the mandate before it actually occurred? Or did that happen afterwards, which is more of like, you know, them realizing, "Oh, okay, this happened, so now we've got to put the paperwork to it, right? Or um justify why we did this, right?" But it doesn't seem to be like the chain of events didn't, from what I've seen, really don't seem to be adding up. And I'll go over what I mean by that in this video. Okay? Um but I think it's kind of concerning that I'm the one asking these questions and not the media itself, not the people in, well, I don't know if the people in charge of the investigation are asking these questions, but because I mean, like, nothing has been really released or said or anything. But the media itself doesn't seem to be asking these questions. And I know a lot of people are getting frustrated with the OPP here in Kenora because, well, I see it on public feeds, right? Um, and I mean, this isn't the first time that an alleged excess of force has been used. Um, I've seen it throughout the summers, like, and around Kenora, and where mostly with the homeless or people, um, the more vulnerable people of society. Uh, they're the ones I feel like really tend to get bullied, but I'm I know it happens to other people too because I've witnessed it. Anyways, I'm not gonna get into all that right now because I wanna focus on this particular situation, because this particular situation is a good example of, um, why we need a proper review of OPP procedures, right? So, initially, the officers received a call about a man in crisis. The call indicated that there was uh, a blade of some sort. Um, Officers, they weren't attending some random call, right? The call, from my understanding, when it came through, it indicated that there was a man in crisis and he had a potential weapon, right? A potential blade. So the OPP knew that the situation could potentially get volatile. I mean, realistically, when they're attending any call, there is that potential that it could get volatile or threatening in some way, right? But the difference is, with every other call versus this call, is a potential weapon was identified, right? And it was identified that he was in crisis, in a medical, well, it didn't say medical state, but when somebody is in crisis, it's some sort of it usually is some sort of, no, I'm not even going to say that. The guy was in crisis, so they should have acted appropriately and taken into consideration that he was not at his best, right? But regardless, it could have and it did get volatile, right? So why were they not wearing their PPE? Why were they not wearing their protective equipment, their personal protective equipment, right? And body cameras are part of that personal protective equipment, because should something happen, it protect it, and the officers acting appropriately, it protects the officer from any sort of accusations or liability, right? Because there is a visual recording and potentially a verbal recording too. I don't know how in depth these body cameras are, um, or if it records voice as well. I honestly am not 100% sure. I would assume that it does. Um, but that's an assumption, right? Um, okay. So, there's the question, so that's the first question. How many officers were there? And why was none of them wearing their body camera? That alone raises a bunch of red flags, because here here they're attending a call that came in with somebody in some sort of crisis. This person did have a weapon identified of some sort. Um, and so they had an idea what they were walking into. So why not take every precaution to protect themselves, right? But that did not happen. How do I know that they weren't wearing their PPE or their body cameras? Well, why would they be asking for witnesses if there was multiple views of the situation? Because for every officer wearing a body camera, there would be an individual view, unless the officers were literally standing right on top of each other, right? But every every place the officer was standing, there should have been a a view of what was occurring, right? So the fact that they're asking for witnesses to come forward indicates that they weren't wearing it. Um, unless there's another reason, or if it's just general procedure that they ask for witnesses in every situation that they attend. I don't know. Um, after the conductive energy weapon was used, why did the conductive energy weapon, the taser, not work on this individual? What conditions were present that prevented it from working? What was the equipment faulty? Um, it, if the conductive energy weapon made contact with this individual, why was it not effective? And in some cases, like from what I'm reading, I'm going to post something in the chats, um, the chat box with this video too, because I found a couple really good articles on conductive energy weapons used by law enforcement in Canada. And it's kind of what I've been drawing my information from when I'm talking about conductive energy weapons, because uh, any sort of weapon is not my field of study. Like, and I really don't. I'm not really familiar with conductive energy weapons or guns or anything like that. So, I mean, what I'm um, what I'm saying about the weapons is not my field of study. So everything that I'm getting is from articles um, that have been very well researched. Like one of the articles was published by the University of Alberta, and another one is, I believe it's a medical from a medical journal. Regardless, um, you know, it it should be asked why this weapon didn't work on this individual, and why is that important? It's important because should the officers be in another situation like this down the line, they should be problem solving now so the same situation doesn't occur and the energy weapon would be would be effective so they wouldn't have to fire their weapons, like fire their regular guns, right? I mean, ideally, I'm sure the officers didn't want a fatality, right? I'm I'm sure as hell hoping that they didn't. But the reality is it did happen. So now the question is, why did it happen? How do you prevent it in the future? And um, was there anything in this situation that should have been done differently, right? What condition was the individual in after the conductive energy weapon was used, but before firing their regular guns, right? So was he in a state of shock? Did the conductive energy weapon um, work at all? Should they have fired it again? Because from what I've been reading, they can fire the conductive energy weapon and um, then it shoots off electricity, but they can actually um, refire it, like not like the the taser part, but they can actually send another jolt of um they can actually send another jolt of electricity so that the person is tased not once but twice or multiple times, right? It doesn't have to be a one shot and deal done type thing, right? So how many times did this individual receive a bolt of energy? Could it have happened? Another jolt been more effective? Like again, nothing has really been released, so we don't really know what truly transpired. But the fact that they are saying that conductive energy weapons were used prior to the um, regular guns indicates that something went wrong because those conductive energy weapons should have worked. What condition was the individual in after the conductive energy weapon was used, but before being fired on by regular guns? Was he standing? Was he verbal? Was he shaking? What visual indications did police have to indicate that he could release the weapon? Because, as mentioned in a previous video, or yeah, my previous video, there's a medical condition out there that um, after being fired upon by a taser, the individual who is tased their muscles actually lock up, meaning he would not be able to release the weapon. So, what indication did police have before shooting their regular guns that he could actually um, release that weapon? Do officers have adequate training surrounding conductive energy weapons? You know, if this whole situation had been managed different, sorry, if this whole situation had been managed differently, would would the tasers have worked? And um, would the individual have potentially been alive as a result? Like that last question, we don't know what would have happened, but um, would the officers had do the officers have adequate training surrounding conductive energy weapons? Um, do they know why it didn't work? You know, were those energy weapons maintained? Uh, was there environmental factors that prevented it from working? Um, it there's so many. I'm assuming there's certain variables out there that would prevent it from working. But I have a really hard time believing that it didn't work because some people are more pain resistant than others. I mean, we're talking about electricity. And regardless if he wasn't feeling a lot of pain or not, I mean, if a taser hit him, he'd still be a conductor. His body would still be affected, right? So, uh, again, I don't know a heck of a lot about weapons, but I do know that um, this whole situation should be analyzed more so that so that this kind of scenario does not happen again. What happened that warranted multiple officers firing? That one is a big one. Like, I'm like, why wasn't there a point person? Why didn't somebody call out they were taking the shot? When multiple officers are attending um, a situation or a call, is there not one officer that takes the lead, or is it just a mass, and every officer hopes that they have the other one's back, but nobody really knows what's going on, you know? Because that kind of sounds like what the situation was here. Otherwise, why would multiple officers be firing on this guy? What exactly did when did the mandate get invoked? Was it before or after the shooting? If it was before the shooting, okay, that kind of makes sense. But if it was after the shooting, again, it's kind of like calling a state of emergency when the emergency has already taken place. And considering that there is a fatality, that now raises a lot of other red flags because uh, it's almost like, okay, we got multiple officers firing. We don't know why they were firing. We don't know why they weren't wearing their body cams. We don't know why the conductive energy weapon didn't use or didn't work. There's too many unknown variables that just don't add up. And now this mandate is being invoked potentially after the shooting. So, I mean, I know what that sounds like. I'm not going to say what it sounds like, but I know what it sounds like, and I'm sure everybody else does too. Um, What criteria needs to so when invoking a mandate, what criteria needs to be presented before the mandate is allowed to be invoked? So are are police officers just allowed to go in and say and evoke a mandate without talking to anybody? Like, are they just allowed to go in shooting and saying, "Well, I felt threatened," you know, like, um, I'm sure that's not what happened because I sure as hell hope it isn't what happened. But the reality is we need to look at these mandates. Like we any policy, mandates, whatever, they're not set in stone. They need to when something goes wrong, they need to be looked at, right? So what criteria needs to be present before the mandate is allowed to be invoked? So what factors um, were present that warranted this mandate being used? You know, was all the things that um, were all the things done that should have been done before the mandate was used? And like, I I don't know. Um, I don't know exactly why this mandate exists. As I said in a previous video, I half suspect that it's because in the potential of like a hostage situation. But the thing is, in this situation, media has not said anything about a hostage. And OPP are is looking for witnesses. So, which indicates that there probably wasn't one because that person would then be a witness, right? Um, if there, if OPP are allowed to go in and um, without any sort of rules, and they're just allowed to go in and shoot a person because they're holding a weapon, then that person is robbed of fair representation in court. They're they're robbed of a fair legal trial. The police are then allowed to play sorry, I'm saying this wrong. Hang on a second. Okay. So when the police go in and they do this, they're then acting as law enforcers, judges, and executioners, right? And I mean, realistically, we are talking about a man who was shot in an area, the torso, where in a fairly remote area of the province, where medical help obviously could not get there fast enough. So, I mean, we are talking about a kill shot. So, um, and the police, when they invoked that mandate, they they knew that the guy would potentially die. And one of the officers on that chat that I posted indicated that um any any shot could be fatal even in the leg because they could hit an artery. Yeah. But you can put a tourniquet on a leg, you can't put a tourniquet on a torso. It's a lot harder to slow the bleeding on your torso than it is on your leg, right? And yes, there is the potential of hitting an artery, but that's why they should have shot for the knee or lower down on the leg, get the guy to lose balance, fall to the floor, knife falls too, hopefully, like these are all potentials that could have happened. And saying the torso is a bigger target, if we have people on the street with weapons and they're the people who are supposed to be protecting us, I don't feel that comfortable with that if their comment is, well, it's a bigger target. Well, if you're shooting at the torso because it's a bigger target, go to a firing range and figure out how to hit a smaller target. Like, and if you can't hit a smaller target, you shouldn't be on the street with a weapon. Because I mean, in some sooner or later, in some situation, hopefully a lot later, if at all, they're probably going to have to fire that weapon, and hopefully there's not somebody else standing next to the person they're shooting at. I mean, I wouldn't want to be in that situation knowing that the person holding the gun couldn't hit anything bigger than like, or couldn't hit anything smaller uh, than a torso. Like, it's kind of unnerving and kind of upsetting to think that that is the rationale um, that they're using to justify the mandate, right? Um, when it is determined that the criteria is met to warrant using or invoking the mandate, what procedure should have been followed to invoke it? So, can these officers just be like, I'm invoking the mandate and start firing? Or do they have to call it in and be like, this is the situation? Um, Now, obviously, that might not always be the case, but again, we're looking at a lot of different factors that don't exactly um, make make a heck of a lot of sense. Again, why weren't they wearing their body cams? Why didn't um, the conductive energy weapons? Why didn't they work? Like there are so many different things that don't really make a lot of sense. So it's important to ask these questions because how do you avoid something like this from happening again, right? Is there actually a procedure that they're supposed to follow before invoking the mandate? And who is allowed to invoke it? Is it the officers themselves, or does SIU have to make that decision? Or is it somebody else? And whoever is responsible for invoking it, were they notified and was a decision made before the regular guns were fired? Um, and the other thing is Kenora SIU too close to the situation for a neutral investigation to occur? So SIU evoked the mandate, but it's my understanding that um, it wasn't broadcast till after the whole situation had been resolved or finalized. Um, Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. From my understanding, it wasn't broadcasted until regular shots had been fired. So, in a situation like that, where SIU is now evoking the mandate after this individual's already passed or is bleeding out, is SIU too close to the situation? Because to me, the mandate should have been evoked before shots were fired if they were going to evoke the mandate at all, because again, it's like calling a state of emergency after the emergency has taken place and has already been dealt with, right? SIU investigators should not be able to investigate an area they live in. They're just too close to the situation. They're investigating their peers and their work colleagues. I mean, that can't be easy for them, especially in a smaller community. And the next thing is, if there was no hostage, why couldn't the police just have given the individual space? You know, like, yes, you wouldn't want him to leave the area. No, you wouldn't want things to escalate, but them going at the situation how they did, it did escalate to the point where guns were fired and now there's a fatality. Um, why didn't they back off a little bit and call for reinforcements when they figured out what they were dealing with? Um, why wasn't medical professionals notified? Like, if they thought that, so this is another thing. This is another reason I am asking, when was the mandate invoked? Because if it had been invoked before guns went off, somebody would have been notified. That person who gave the okay or whatever could have called 911, or not 911, but ambulance to get down there. So hopefully, you know, give this guy some medical attention before fatality occurred, right? Um, but again, that didn't happen. Or, well, medical assistance didn't get there in time. Um, but if they had kind of just monitored the situation until further help got there, maybe this guy would have gotten tired and de-escalated. You know, there is that possibility. Sooner or later, he might have gotten tired. You know, like he might have need to go use the washroom, or had gotten other things to distract him. You know, you don't know, because that that window was never really explored, right? So, or I from what I know, from what I'm hearing with everything, it wasn't explored. And you know, part of the reason I'm um, going over all this and mentioning all this is there are so many cracks in the justice system, in law enforcement, in social services, that the only way to actually fix any of these cracks is for people to ask these questions, right? And in doing so, hopefully preventing other needless deaths. Like, this whole situation could have probably gotten a lot different if police had better crisis training, or and I mean, like, um there is a unit on the police force that does deal with crises. It, um Medical crises. Like, were they notified? Were they there? If they weren't there, why weren't they? Because I mean, this was something that was identified initially as a guy in crisis, right? Um, I'm also kind of concerned that um, media isn't asking these questions. That I'm the one actually asking them, because I'm not trained in any sort of like journalism or media or whatever. Like, that is not my training. And that is like, I'm not doing this as a job. I'm doing this as just a private citizen looking at a scenario going, what the heck? Why is this happening? And holy, how things could have gotten a lot different. And why didn't they? And why is there so many holes in this whole situation that doesn't make sense? Um, from what I've read and heard, there's just the media has just mentioned the highlights of what occurred, but not actually how it happened or what could potentially be done to prevent needless deaths in the future. Mandates are not set in stone, they can be changed, but for people to actually change them, they have to be asking these questions. They have to be reviewing things. And I really hope that in the future, this OPP mandate can be reviewed and looked at on how it is invoked, who can invoke it, and what procedures and criteria need to be in place before invoking it. That's all I've got for right now. Tomorrow or Friday, I'm not quite sure which, I'm going to be going back over some stuff that's going on in Manitoba. I focused in on Kenora over the last little bit, partially because, you know, I I live in Kenora, so I'm kind of I have an interest on what goes on in the area, right? But it's also, it's so to be honest, it really annoyed me um how an individual on that chat spoke to me. You know, over the past few years, um I have really tried to maintain professional um and personal boundaries. I have really not said what I'm thinking to next to anybody, um, because, like, Kenora is such a small community, and you want a personal life, but you also have to maintain your professional life too. And quite often, when you're helping individuals, those individuals are dependent on the professional relationships you have with other professionals. So you don't really want to, like, put too many waves in the water, so to speak. But I'm not an acting social worker anymore. And so I'm in the unique position where I've got the education, but I'm not really I'm not working as a social worker. So I'm in the unique situation where I can actually call people out on stuff, which is actually pretty awesome, to be honest. Um, and hopefully make a change that I had wanted to do since the time I first entered university. Like nobody enters the social work field going, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be a social worker. I'm going to be the least paid professional um out there." Because realistically, social workers are among the lowest paid professionals in Canada. And I mean, you don't enter this field if you're interested in the money. You enter this field because you care about people. You care about what happens. And um so now that I don't really have clients who are dependent on the relationships that I develop with others, um I can actually I'm actually in the position where I can actually um speak out and hopefully make a true difference, which I'm sure the college didn't see coming, but that's okay. Anyways, um, yeah, so tomorrow or Friday, we're gonna go back to issues that are happening in Manitoba. Um, a few things that I've been thinking about talking about is going back to the petition that I had started in Manitoba and how not one MLA in Manitoba would bring it forth to the legislative assembly. Um, Another thing I wanted to talk about is um, I'm drawing a blank. Sorry. Uh, the other thing I want to talk about is the Premier of Manitoba just announced possible free transportation for youth around Winnipeg. Um, as a parent, I can tell you that scares the heck out of me. I don't have my kids right now, but I can tell you as a parent, I want to know where they are. And I don't feel comfortable thinking that they can walk on and off a bus at random anytime they want. There's like you would hope the parents would keep an eye on their kids, but the reality is um a lot of kids don't have that. And um as sad as that is, it's the reality, right? And there are a lot of dangers surrounding what the premier is suggesting with this. And I want to go over that because I think that is super important and it affects our youth and a huge portion of the population. Anyways, that's it for tonight. You guys have a good night. Talk to you in the next few days.